The Mercury Cougar was around for a while, and over its lifetime, it's undergone many changes. Come the last generation, and it's nothing like what it used to be. That's not to say that the 8th generation Cougar is bad. However, it was definitely a sales flop for Mercury, and I feel as if many have forgotten about them. And so I wanted to shed some light on the last gen Cougars and have a deep analysis on them so you don't have to. At the end of the video, I will have a tier list and personally rank this car after having a better understanding of it. To add, you guys can rank this car as well. There will be a poll in the community tab for you guys to place your vote, and we can see what the majority thinks of the last gen Mercury Cougar.
This is Bob Jones, the trainer for the cat, and she's actually a little young and wants to play a lot. It's a little harder than the others to make go through the paces. Judy, the one that we used this morning for the newspapers, and that's a little temperamental. She's just not going along with any programs this afternoon. And Tinker, she's young and she wants to play. It's quite an amazing thing about this cat that I said before. And
if this is your first time watching me, I make videos about the cars from the 70s up until the 2000s. Each week is a different decade, and obviously for this week, we are in the early 2000s. My goal is to bring back memories for those of you who have owned these older cars and to inform everyone about them who don't remember. With that said, I do sure hope you all enjoyed this week's video. If the 2000s aren't your style, stay tuned for next week's as it will take place in the 70s. The Mercury Cougar name has been around since 1967, first introduced as a pony car. Basically, this was the alternative to the Mustang. When people think of Mercury Cougar, these first gens usually come to mind. These second gens are also pretty popular in the muscle car community. Then for the third generation, the Cougar turned into more of a personal luxury car, and instead of downsizing, these babies actually grew in size. Come the fourth generation, the Mercury Cougar could be had in a 4-door sedan, station wagon, and coupe, and this can be said for the fifth gens as well. Now for the sixth and seventh generations, the Cougar was back to being more of a personal luxury car, which makes sense. Mercury's audience was on the older side, but also there were those performance-focused packages or trims on most of these generations, such as the XR7s. For the models from 1983 to 1988, which is the 6th gen, there was a turbo version, and for the last 2 years, a 5-liter V8 version. In 1997, the 7th gen entered production, and the Cougar name would end as well. But don't worry, the Mercury Cougar was back just 2 years later for 1999. And now, finally we can learn more about this car. Personal luxury coupes were phasing out by the late 90s to early 2000s. The Eldorado and Alante was discontinued along with the Mark 8. They just weren't popular like how they used to be. With that in mind, the last gen Cougar was a sporty 3-door hatchback and was the first to have front-wheel drive. Also, there hasn't been a sporty hatchback coupe in Mercury's lineup since 1986 with the Capri. Essentially, these Cougars replaced the Ford Probe, and some of you might remember that Ford tried replacing the Mustang with the Probe, which thankfully did not happen. These 8th gens were on a world car platform, which just means that these cars were sold globally with very few changes for each market. And this wasn't the first time Ford has done this. The Ford Escort and Mercury Lynx were world cars as well. Anyway, these were sold overseas as the Ford Cougar and shared its platform with the Ford Contour and Mercury Mystique. When looking at this car, you can tell the European influence, and personally, I don't think they look terrible. Obviously, I'm judging this car from a 2024 perspective. However, when these came out with Ford's new edge styling, these were pretty respectable at the time. I think, at least from the rear, they look like a Dodge Stratus Coupe or Eclipse from around the same time, and that's a good thing. So, looks aren't everything, it's what's on the inside, or in this case, what's under the hood that matters. There were two engine options, either a 2-liter Z-Tech straight 4 that made 125 horsepower and 130 pound-feet of torque, or the 2.5 Duratec V6 that made 170 horsepower and 165 pound-feet of torque, and you had the option to have a 5-speed manual or 4-speed auto. 0 to 60 with the V6 was 7.9 seconds. The Audi TT from the same time was only 0.2 seconds faster and 40% more money. With that said, these Cougars were a good option for consumers. In 1999, with its debut, over 88,000 sold, which is incredible. V6 models came with a sport package, and with this came 4-wheel vented disc brakes from the Contour SVT, 16-inch alloy wheels, fog lights, and the speed governor was raised. top speed was around 145 with the manual and 130 with the auto. And these things, from what I read from past owners, handled pretty well. They featured a fully independent multi-link suspension, and for those of you who do not know what that means, this suspension setup allows for a car to flex more, allowing for not only good handling, but also a comfy ride. To add, the Cougar suspension had passive rear steering as well. Another positive element was the fact that these were hatchbacks, so if the styling looks bad to you, at least there is some practicality with it. And of course, the back seats could fold down, allowing for a good amount of room for this type of car. Over the 8th gen's short production run, there were a few additions that came with it. For the year 2001, there was a ZN edition that featured a unique zinc yellow color, along with a hood scoop and spoiler. Speaking of 2001, the Cougar was updated with new headlights and front and rear fascia styling cues. There was even a Roush edition Mercury Cougar, which is very surprising to hear about. There were only 112 made over this 2-year limited run. And of course, these featured racing suspension, body kit, performance drop springs and sway bar, lighter wheels, and a few other Roush features. But nothing was done under the hood, so these still made 170 horsepower. 2002 would mark the end of the Mercury Cougar name, and to celebrate its 35 years of service, Ford came out with an anniversary edition. These had 17-inch wheels, 35th anniversary badges, a hood scoop, along with a few other little features. Back in 1999, these cars cost $18,500 with a V6 manual spec and $19,300 with auto. A Tiburon was around $15,000, a V6 Accord was around $21,000, and the Alera Coupe was around $16,000. The purpose of the last-gen Mercury Cougar was to appeal to a younger demographic, and while they managed to sell over 88,000 units with its debut, sales dropped almost 50% the following year, and then another 50% for 2001. Looking at Mercury's lineup at the time, this car sticks out like a sore thumb. I've definitely noticed this same type of correlation with GM's Oldsmobile line having their attempts to reach out to the younger crowd as well.
Mercury Cougar XR7. Bold, aggressive, richly luxurious. And now there are more Cougars to excite you. Handsome 4-door Bromes, ride engineered by Lincoln Mercury. Sporty Cougar wagons, fresh from the layer with yards of cargo space. Trim 2-door hardtops, smartly styled, smartly priced. At $47.
People were starting to associate the Cougar name with a smooth riding personal luxury coupe, at least for the last few generations, and to have this sporty hatch, it was too much of a change. I'm not saying that these weren't uncomfortable to drive. Many owners said they are, just it wasn't exactly the same feeling. The last Mercury Cougar rolled off the assembly line August 9th, 2002, and that would mark the end of the Cougar name after 35 years. Mercury would soon close up shop as well. With all of that said, what are we thinking in terms of ranking this car from A to D? I provided you all with the information to have more of a supported answer, and I'm curious to see what most of you guys say. Personally, I'm stuck between B or C for this car. When these first came out, which is how I'm going to base my answer, they were unique and they had some decent power. And from the people who have actually owned these cars in their lifetime, most of them have liked it. So with that said, I'm going with B tier for the 8th gen Mercury Cougar. But in terms of today and how well they hold up, I would probably go with C or D. That is going to wrap it up for this week's video. I do sure hope you enjoyed. Like I said earlier in the intro, next week we're going into the 70s, so stay tuned for that. With all that said, enjoy your week. I will see you guys next week for a 70s video.